Let's jump right into it with who am I, right? I am Droid de Jesus. I am a narrative designer at Housemarque, technical narrative designer. I am formerly at Respawn on Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I've worked on a couple of titles, including Madden 20. My first title was developed at the University of Central Florida at the FIRE program. It's called Scamp Hi-Hat Havoc. It's free on Steam. Did a lot of the dialogue and narrative assistance for that. I would really appreciate if y'all go play it. And yeah, so I'm gonna jump right into kind of the meat and bones of my talk, right? Like, what are we gonna do? Gonna do an overview for those, in the audience. I hope everyone knows what hip hop is. We're gonna do a brief overview, talk about hip hop in games, very brief, how it's been used, how it's been not used. And I'm gonna jump into the end of my talk, which is how we tell stories in hip hop and compare that against how we tell stories traditionally. And you'll kind of see these differences and maybe take home a few techniques that you can use in your work. So let's jump right into that. What is hip hop? To me, hip hop is a culture. It's something you live and breathe, right? According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, hip-hop is a cultural movement that attained widespread popularity in the 1980s and 90s on the backing of rap music. But it's way more than just rap music, as I hope many of you in the audience know. This number, 5 here, elements, is arguable. Some people will say it's more, some people will say it's less. I think the original one I heard was like 4. I included fashion in my description because I think that's an important element of the culture, how we dress, how we stunt, right? DJing is the original art form. It's the mixing of the tables and bringing that break beat. emceeing is what most people know. It's rapping, it's putting lyrics together, it's the cadence, the rhythm, the flow. And of course, graffiti, the arts, and dancing, because without dancing, there's no music, right? You feel the music in your bones, and if you can't dance to it, you're not making music. At least that's my interpretation. Fight me over it later. But I love this quote from KRS-One, right? Rap is something you do, hip-hop is something you live, and I stand by that. So where did it start? New York City in the 1970s, generally considered to have begun in the Bronx, New York. Pioneers include people like Grandmaster Flash, Kool Herc, Africa Bambaataa. It's a fusion of so much that was in the Bronx at the time. Puerto Ricans, Jamaicans, and their musical stylings, right? Toasting in Jamaican dance hall, Afro-Latino beats coming from the Puerto Rican side, and that fusion is what really started the genre we know as hip-hop today. You see I have an image here of Kool Herc, who made a credit with being the grandfather of hip-hop. There's a urban legend or urban myth that he was getting yelled at by his mom and scratched the table, really liked the sound, and that's how he started DJing. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never really done interviews on that, but that is the prevailing myth from what I understand. And hip-hop really starts at like these underground block parties where people are just like getting together, vibing. It comes off the heels of disco, which has its own underground movement. And I do not have the time to get into the history of discrimination and disco, but it's really fascinating. I would say go watch the Get Down on Netflix, but Netflix is not giving us another season. So, but back to the talk before I got on my tangent. I want to give you guys kind of a sample of what hip hop sounded like back then. And so, some of you might know DJ Kool Herc, and let me clear my throat, but for those of you who don't, let's take a listen.
1, 2, 3, come on. We got DJ Kool and Duck Get Fresh. Rock it to the beat, cause we are the best. We got Ducky Fresh and Biz Marquee. Rock it to the beat and the place to be. We got Biz Marquee and DJ 20. So hit me with the horns and make that money. Let me see those hands again. Hang on now. Hey, everybody jump, 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 jump. Everybody jump.
And in that little clip, right, you can kind of hear the danceability of this music. You hear why this was popular at parties, why people really got into it, and it caught like wildfire. It moves through you, and that's a big part. That's why dancing is an integral element of hip hop. It literally is the hip and the hop. And that's actually a KRS-One quote. You have the knowledge, the street knowledge, and the information, the hip, and then the movement, the hop. So let's focus now on how hip hop has been utilized in games. For the most part, people have targeted the low-hanging fruit of rhythmic games. Pa Rappa the Rappa and Floor Kids, right? These are very easy things to grab at. DJ Hero is another example. Rhythm games are a natural fit for this genre, but there's so much more we can look at. Wu-Tang, Shaolin Style, DJ, Def Jam, Fight for New York, and Vendetta take the kind of masculine aspects of the culture and that more aggressive nature of the culture and turn them into literal combat games. And my personal one of my personal favorite examples of hip hop as a culture being integrated into games is Jet Set Radio. And it leans on the graffiti aspect and kind of allows you to go around tagging, spray painting things. It has its problems. It lacks people of color. I think in the original Jet Set Radio, there's one playable black character. I think in the second one, they expand on that. But in the original, I think it's just Graham, or it might also be one other one. The guy with the boombox, I can't remember if he's in the first or the second. But for the most part, there's not a lot of playable people of color. And, it's a very Japanese influence on the game. And a lot of these games, though, what they lack is a understanding of the culture. It's very surface level. It doesn't go into a deep dive as hip hop as a culture and hip hop as a lifestyle. Jet Set Radio gets kind of close, but it has its downsides. And I'm gonna play a little clip from Jet Set Radio just so you guys kind of hear what the vibe was like for that game.
Fly like a butterfly. Fly like a butterfly. Fly like a butterfly. Fly.
That's nice. Wild and wonderful.
Felt like a butterfly.
All right, so you guys can kind of get a good sense of the kind of DJ influence along with the graffiti that went into a game. The soundtrack for Jet Set Radio is one of my all-time favorites. I highly recommend you listen to it if you really want to get a good feel for what this genre can contribute beyond just rhythm games. All right, so now we're going to get into kind of the meat and bones of the talk, which is story. As a narrative designer, this is my area of expertise. Before we can get into the hip-hop side, we kind of got to talk about the traditional side, the way we've told stories in the past. For the narrative designers in the room, this may be very elementary for y'all. For those of you who aren't narrative designers, it may be a little more insightful. And I'm gonna briefly go over what the kind of structures that people have used before. If you want more in-depth conversation or questions about these, you can come up to me afterwards. All right, so I think everyone should be familiar with the 3-act structure. Rising actions, it's what they teach in American middle schools. It's what every film ever uses. I'm being flippant. Obviously, they use other techniques. But, for the most part, every Marvel film, I think, uses this. There's a beginning, an inciting incident, climax in Act 1, but you keep building on that climax until you hit a big plot twist in the middle of Act 2. And at the end of Act 2, you begin to have your falling action where you resolve all the crises and, wrap up your story and all of that. Notice that inside each act, there are more minutia kind of obstacles and little moments like second thoughts. These are actually based on a different story structure, and I'm going to get to that one in a moment. The next one, for those of you who are a little more advanced in medias res, this is a very popular technique for Final Fantasy games and Fire Emblem games. They start in the middle and then move outward, kind of oscillating between the beginning and the end. As you can see, this plot line moves forward, but time moves in a loop. In medias res is really powerful when you use it with amnesia, but it's a really overdone trope as well. So kind of keep that in mind. Next, we have the 4-act structure. This one is very common in anime, and what it does is it takes Act 2 and breaks it into 2 parts. So you have events leading to your midpoint, and then events after the midpoint that the character is reacting to. And anime really likes this one. I don't know why. It's just very common. Next, I have to say it, I'm sorry to every narrative person in the room, but we have to talk about the hero's journey. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is, the hero of 1,000 faces. You kind of have a call to adventure, and then you have your trials and tribulations, and then you return back to the beginning. It's a cycle. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Avatar: The Last Airbender, every single hero story ever has used this structure in some form or warped it to meet their own needs, but they start here. And that's kind of my brief overview of traditional storytelling techniques. Now we get to talk about the fun stuff. How do hip-hop artists tell stories? They use some similar but also different techniques, and I think those are incredibly valuable to look at. So we're going to start with the first one. I've noticed in a lot of hip-hop songs, and I kind of blazed through my credentials earlier. I've written hip-hop music and done instrumentals since I was like 12, so I know a thing or two. But I've noticed in a lot of hip-hop music, there are 3 basic questions that the artist is answering when they tell a story. And this does not include music where they are bragging or, diss tracks or anything like that. These are storytelling songs, right? Artists like Common, Lupe Fiasco, even Kanye West, when they're telling a story, they usually are answering these 3 questions. Who is the person? Why do I give a damn? And what problems are they facing? And importantly, they often tell them in that order. And so as a result, this has led me to propose a structure, which I call the 3C structure: character, care, conflict. It's very, how to put this, direct one to another. So you start with, who am I? Why do I care? And what's the conflict I'm dealing with? Notably, in hip-hop songs, you can do this across multiple verses or within a single verse. I'm actually going to play a sample from one of my all-time favorite albums, and I'll put the lyrics up on screen for those who might have audio processing problems. And I'll actually break down each line so you can see kind of where the character starts, where the care starts, and where the conflict starts. So we're going to get into that one right here.
Dedicate. This one right here goes out to my homie with the drink. Nah, I mean, He said, I write what I see. Right to make it right, don't like what I be. I'd like to make it like the sights on TV. Quite the great life, so nice and easy. See, now you can still die from that, but it's better than not being alive from straps. Agreed, a meat notebook and a bic that clip when it's pushed and a whack-ass beat. That's a track that's weak that he got last week, cause everybody in the stew was like, that's that heat. A bass-heavy medley with a sample from the 70s with a screwed-up hook that went
stack that cheese,
something.
Stack that cheese,
Mother, sister, cousin,
stack that cheese,
he couldn't think of nothing.
Stack that cheese.
He turns down the beat, writer's block impedes. Crying from the next room, a baby in need of some Pampers and some food and a place to sleep. That plus a black Cadillac on D's is what keep him on track to be a great MC.
One you never heard of, I push it harder for the rhyme. I feel like murder, but hip-hop just saved me.
I had to let the chorus ride out a little bit there. Sorry. I didn't put the lyrics up, but I was vibing. So you can see in the blue, right, we have who the character is, right? He is someone who wants to be a famous rapper. Actually, this song is part of a operatic album, kind of similar to, for those of you familiar with, like, I don't know, Hamilton or something, right? It's same structure. This is much older than Hamilton, but it tells a story across the entire album. And there's a recurring character whose name is Michael Young History. This character, this is at the start of his journey, right? He's trying to become a rapper. Why do I care about him? Well, he's lived a rough life, right? You can still die from that, right? Like, he's had it difficult, and he uses his writing to escape. And that's what he's trying to do, and that's why you should care. But the conflict that comes in, right? Like, he's a parent. He's got to provide for his family, and sometimes that's going to conflict with your dreams. and now we have conflict. If for those of you who don't know the songs, I'll spoil it for you. He does succeed. He manages to become a famous rapper and, get his mom out the woods, that kind of stuff. So, or get his mama in the woods, out the hood. That's the line. All right, moving on to the next kind of thing. Vignettes are another common story structure for hip hop songs. In these stories, the slice of life kind of short stories, we look immediately at the needs and wants of the character, and we don't really expand on them. We just kind of talk about them and move on. Each verse in these kind of songs is a short story. Think of this structure and these kind of use is very good for side quests and minor characters, right? We want to make our needs and wants of that character apparent immediately, and then we want to bring that back to the player so that they can engage with the character right then and there. I threw up the Dubliners, which is a great, dense novel of slice of life pieces. But musically, I have a really fun song that I'm also very fond of. In case you can't tell, I'm fond of every song I put in here. This one is called 15 Minutes Away by Kenan. He is from, I believe, Somalia. And we'll just kind of listen to the first verse and you'll see kind of what I mean. But every verse actually in this song is a different story.
Yeah, I'm sending this one out to everybody that's had to wait on a money transfer. Yeah, it's kinda whack when they charge you like 10% on the dollar. But you know how good it feels when they say, you can pick it up today. It's 15 minutes away, you can pick it up today. It's 15 minutes away, you can pick it up today. It's 15 minutes away, you can pick it up today. It's 15 minutes away. The worst thing is the waiting, man. It's spiritually draining. I guess I could repaint it, but don't think I'm complaining. I'm in my small apartment. This month has been the hardest. I couldn't afford some omelets. I'm broke like an empty promise. Sometimes when I'm in a meeting and everyone else is eating, I feel so awkward asking, so I pretend like I'm fasting. My girl had paid my payments. She wants to save my anus. She says my love's contagious, but my pride is so outrageous. She sent me Western Union so I can make it through, and it felt so good when she said write down this 11 digits. I go out to receive it. I'm desperate and I need it. Feels like an angel speaking. I can hardly believe it.
Okay, so who is Kenan, right? He's struggling, and his needs are very apparent very quickly. He needs his money order to come in, but his wants are a little different, right? He wants a romance, and he wants it to work, but he's got some conflict there. But we don't really dwell on that in these kind of vignettes. And when telling a story, like a vignette style story in a side quest in a game, this is really important. I want to care about what I'm doing, but I don't want to dwell on it, because unless that character is going to come up multiple times, if this is a one-off story, we need to be very concise in how we approach that narrative. And so I like this vignette structure for that. And now for the final structure I kind of want to propose, this is very critical to hip-hop as a genre, is this verse-chorus structure. I also have a picture up here representing something from improv called The Herald, which is very similar and utilizes a lot of film storytelling, which games could borrow from. In The Herald, you start with an opening, kind of like an intro to a song, right? And then you have 3 beats, each one's a verse, and then you have a group game. And that group scene is your chorus. You are reinforcing the themes of each of the beats that came beforehand. And that's critical. You need to make sure you touch on the themes that you had done when you're repeating. And then you loop this a couple times, and then you put a button to end the song or end the performance. And I kind of want to show you a song that is close to my heart, that I'm not going to get into... let it play the whole thing, but I'll play the first verse and the chorus so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about here. And yeah, this is the one that sounds a little, this one sounds a little softer than the other one, so try to listen a little closely. Oh, never mind.
It's just me against the world. I got nothing to lose. This is me against the world.
The cops are topping me. The project's full of bullets. No bodies is dropping. There ain't no stopping me. Constantly moving while making millions. Witnessing killers, leaving dead bodies in the abandoned buildings. Carries the children cause they're illin'. Addicted to killing and the appeal from the cap villain. Without feeling, but will they last or be blasted? Hard-headed bastard. Maybe you'll listen in this casket. The aftermath. More bodies being buried. I'm losing my homies in a hurry. They relocating to the cemetery. Got me worried. Stressing my vision's blurry. The question is, will I live? No one in the world loves me. I'm headed for danger. Don't trust strangers. Put one in the chamber whenever I'm feeling this anger. Don't wanna make excuses, cause this is how it is. What's the use unless we're shooting? No one notices the youth. It's just me against the world, baby.
Me against the world.
So notice in this verse, right, the main themes we're working with are loneliness, isolation, and struggle. And the chorus is very simple, just me against the world. And it reinforces those ideas that Pac here is talking about. So the next question naturally is, are there any games that do this? Kind of. So I'm about to spoil this game if you haven't played it. It came out in 2015. Cover your ears until the next slide is done if you don't want it spoiled. Otherwise, we're going to delve right into it. Undertale really exemplifies this model, and I'm not saying Toby Fox did this intentionally. However, Toby Fox is a composer, and so there may be some sort of subconscious direction. Each boss fight, which is narrative, can be considered a chorus, and each section uses a theme that is reinforced in that boss fight. Think of that as a verse. And then there's even a bridge at the end. If you've beaten the neutral route, you get into the full pacifist route. There's a section that is eerie, tonally different, and thematically different than the rest of the game. It's the secret lab. That's what a bridge functions as. It's a change of pace, and Undertale does this exactly. I'm not going to play Megalovania. If you haven't heard it, still worth listening to. But I think the important takeaway from this is that Undertale really is successful not because of this structure, but I would guarantee the structure plays a role in it. Being able to grasp what it's trying to do and having those themes reinforced over and over again, that's powerful, and we can use that in our stories. So yeah. The last bit I want to touch on today, this is kind of a little bonus round if I had the time, and I do, is how hip-hop artists use language. You'll notice, as narrative folks, we tend to be a little wordy. And hip-hop artists, while they are lyrically proficient, are very concise with their words. Nothing is thrown away, and the language reinforces itself through repetition. There's also kind of a hierarchy to their language. And this hierarchy follows this pattern, right? Actions over ideas over descriptions. If I can turn a description into a concept and kind of, extrapolate it outward, we'll do that. If I can turn it into a concrete action, do that instead. And so to close this out, I'm going to use an example that does this fairly well, and probably one of the most important songs of the last decade. For those of you who don't know this track, it was utilized by the Black Lives Matter movement as kind of like a chant, right? Kind of reinforce the feeling of how we were going. This is the clean version of the song. So I have a playlist at the end that has all the songs in this, and it does not have the clean version. Just keep that in mind when you go and look it up.
All's my life I has to fight. All's my life hard times like bad trips like Nazareth, I'm f***ed up, homie, you f***ed up. But if God got us, then we gon' be alright.
We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. Huh? We gon' be alright. We gon' be alright. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be alright.
And when I wake up, I recognize you looking at me for the pay cut. Bahamas, I be looking at you from the face down. 1 Mac 11, even boom with the bass down. Scheming, and let me tell you about my life. Painkillers only put me in the twilight. But pretty Benjamin is the highlight. I tell my mama I love her, but this what I like. Lord knows, 20 of them in my Chevy. Tell them all to come and get me, reaping everything I sow. So my karma come in heaven, no preliminary hearings on my record. I'm a gangster in silence for the record. Tell the world I know it's too late. Boys and girls, I think I've gone crazy. Trying to side my face this all day. Won't you please believe when I say, when you know we we've been hurt, been down before. When our pride was low, looking at the world like, where do we go? And we hate po-po, wanna kill us dead in the street for sure. I'm at the preacher's door, my knees getting weak and my gun might blow, but we gon' be alright.
All right. And so you can kind of see I color coded some of this to make it easy to break down. But in this song, you can see actions are in red, and they are the predominant set of lyrics. Right? All's my life I had to fight. That is a thing. You fight, right? That is a thing you do. Right? You know, scheming, that's kind of a description of what he's doing, but it's not really an action, right? Painkillers only put me in a twilight, also a description, you know, but kind of more conceptual stuff, right? Like what Machiavelli even boom with the bass down. That's a broad kind of idea. And so you can kind of get a concept of how actions supersede ideas, which supersede descriptions. This one's a little awkward because descriptions and ideas are kind of equal in their distribution of this song. But generally speaking, when we're writing, we want to focus on what characters do. And then if we can't do that, how do they think? And then as a last resort, what are they like, right? And that hierarchy is really powerful in engaging players and keeping them actively looking for what happens next. And that's really the end of my talk. I had a bonus slide, but we're going to skip past that one because I'm pressed for time. So thank you all for coming. I've got a little treat at the end. There's a... Oh, I almost forgot. Sorry, I forgot this. Like I said, I work at Housemark. We are hiring, and they relocated me out to Finland. It's been one of the best experiences of my life. If you're interested, I know we're hiring for like an animator and a VFX artist. So please hit me up after if you're interested. But yeah, you can download the playlist on Spotify that contains all the songs featured in this template. And if you want to stay in touch with me, you can. The one on the left, it's mirrored on my screen, but the one on the left contains my contact info. I have about 5 minutes, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to approach the mic. And other than that, thank you all for coming. Yes, sir.
So you talked about the 3C structure of hip hop. Could you provide some examples of maybe how we could deviate or bend those rules?
Sure. You know, using a technique like in medias res, you might start with a conflict at the beginning instead of starting with the character, and then kind of flesh out who the character is and why we care about them. That might be one way you could deviate from that structure and kind of combine those two techniques.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, if no one else has any questions, I'll be around, and thank you all for coming. Have a good one.